Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. The importance of the Mississippi River as a conduit into the heart of North America cannot and should never be underestimated. Throughout the continent's post-European contact periods, this key waterway played a crucial role in the development and settlement of the vast heartland of the United States. Join me as I continue a deep dive into the significance of the Mississippi River with the help of our friends at Librivox.
Discovery and exploration of the Mississippi Valley and history of the discovery of the Mississippi River.
In 1640, the Iroquois War broke out in all its fury, and the missionaries had to abandon all hopes of extending to the west, and the Mississippi was now forgotten. The war proved fatal to the allies of the French. By 1650, all Upper Canada was a desert and not a mission. Not a single Indian was to be found. Where but a few years before the cross towered in each of their many villages, and hundreds of fervent Christians gathered around their 15 missionaries. The earth still reeked with the blood of the pastor and his flock. 6 missionary fathers had fallen by the hands of the Iroquois. Another had been fearfully mutilated in their hands. But scarce was there a ray of peace when the survivors were again summoned to the west. Father Garreau was sent on Lake Superior in 1656, but was killed ere he left the St. Lawrence. De Grossay and another Frenchman, more fortunate, wintered on the shores of the lake in 1658. They too visited the Sioux, and from the fugitive Hurons among them heard still clearer tidings of a great river on which they had struck, as plunging through unknown wood and waste, over cliffs and mountains, they had sought to escape the destructive hand of the pursuing Iroquois. It was a beautiful river, writes the annalist, large, broad, and deep, which would bear comparison, they say, with our St. Lawrence. On its banks they found the Abimisec, the Illinois of later days. The Lac des Pouanes is laid down on Champlain's map of 1632, but in all probability only from report, as it is placed north of Lake Superior, unless it is meant for Lake Winnipeg, which, like Green Bay, got its name from the Algonquin epithet for the Deotas, as coming from the Pacific. From other quarters, too, they began to hear of this great river. The missionaries on the Saguenay heard of the Winnipegook and their bay, whence 3 seas can be reached, the north, the south, and the west. The missionaries in New York saw Iroquois war parties set out against the Ontonagon, whose towns lay on a beautiful river, the Ohio, which leads to the Great Lake, as they called the sea, where they traded with Europeans who pray to God as we do, and have rosaries and bells to call men to prayers. This sea, the missionaries judged, must be the Gulf of Mexico, or that of California. Meanwhile, Menard, an old Huron missionary, proceeded in 1660 to Lake Superior and founded an Ottawa mission on the southern shore. He, too, heard of the Mississippi and had resolved to reach the nations on its banks, undeterred by the difficulties of the way. But a work of charity called him to another quarter, and a death in the wilderness arrested his projects, before which one of half his years would have recoiled. Publications have put a Jesuit mission on the lake, and even on the Mississippi, as early as 1653. Father Allouez also heard of the great river, which empties, says he, as far as I can conjecture, into the sea by Virginia. He heard, too, of the Illimuec and the Naduesiuec, and here, for the first time, we find the river bear a name. They live, says he, on the great river called Mississippi. The Western Mission now received new accessions, and their hopes of entering the great river became more and more sanguine. The distinguished Father Dablon was sent out as superior of the Ottawa missions. A station among the Illinois was determined upon. Father Marquette named to begin it, and the study of the Illinois language actually begun by that missionary. From the accounts of a young man who was his master in that language, he formed new conjectures as to its mouth, and was apparently the first who heard of the Missouri. As to his intended voyage, he says, "If the Indians who promise to make me a canoe do not break their word, we shall go into this river as soon as we can with a Frenchman, and this young man given me, who knows some of these languages, and has a readiness for learning others. We shall visit the nations that inhabit them in order to open the passage to so many of our fathers who have long awaited this happiness." This discovery will give us a complete knowledge of the southern or western sea. Meanwhile, Alloway, on the 3rd of November, 1669, left Sault Ste. Marie's to visit Green Bay. With great danger and hardship he reached it, and spent the winter preaching to the Potawatomis, Menomonees, Sacs, Foxes, and Winnebagos. On the 16th of April, 1670, he began to ascend Fox River, and passing two rapids, reached Winnebago Lake, and crossing it came to a river from a wild oat lake. He was now, however, in search of the Outagamis, or foxes, and turned up their river. He found them dejected by the loss of several families carried off by the Senecas on the banks of Lake Machihiganing, our Lake Michigan. After consoling them as he could, he explained the object of his coming, and after giving them his first general instruction in Christianity, sailed down their river again, and continued to the lake of Machkutench, whom, says one, the Hurons called Assistectaranus, or Fire Nation. To reach them, he traversed the lake or marsh at the head of the Wisconsin, for they lay on that river. It was, he says, a beautiful river running southwest without any rapid. It leads, he says, further on to the great river named Mississippi, which is only 6 days' sail from here. Thus had Alloway at last reached the waters of the Mississippi, as Nicolet had done 30 years before. There was now no difficulty in reaching it. Father Dablon wished himself to visit the spot, and, in company with Alloway, he returned to Green Bay, and as early as September in the same year, both were again at Mascoutens. F. Alloway is the first missionary who reached the waters of the Mississippi. He twice ascended the Fox River in 1670, and twice overthrew the idol at Cacaline Rapid. Fortunately, Mr. Squire knows but little of the French missionaries at the north, or he would not have called the good fathers infamous for thus unseating the sacred object of the worship of the Aborigines to substitute what with whimsical archaeology he calls the fictions of their own religion. Alloway is the first to use a term at all like Michigan for the lake, and confirms my conjecture of the identity of the Mascoutens and Assistagaranona. Father Dablon had meanwhile been named Superior General of the Canada Missions, and seemed to have taken the more interest in the exploring of the Mississippi by the Wisconsin, as the projected Illinois mission of Father Marquette was, for a time at least, defeated. The peace on which they relied was suddenly destroyed. The Sioux, provoked by the rash insolence of the Hurons and Ottawas, declared war, and sent back to the missionary the pictures which he had given them. Stratagem enabled them to neutralize the advantage which firearms gave their enemies. The Hurons and Ottawas were completely defeated, and fugitives already before the face of the Iroquois. They now fled again from a more terrible foe in the west. All hopes of his Illinois mission being thus dashed, the dejected Marquette followed his fugitive flocks, and as the Ottawas proceeded apart as Manitonlin, he accompanied the Hurons to Mackinac. Here, doubtless, a hope of reaching the Mississippi by the Wisconsin again roused him, as we soon find in the burden of his thoughts. Father Dablon published the Relations of 1670-71 and its map of Lake Superior. In his description of the map, he at once alludes to the Mississippi. To the south flows the great river which they call the Mississippi, which can have its mouth only in the Florida Sea, more than 400 leagues from here. Further on, he says, I deem it proper to set down here all we have learnt of it. It seems to encircle all our lakes, rising in the north and running to the south, till it empties in a sea which we take to be the Red Sea, Gulf of California, or that of Florida, as we have no knowledge of any great rivers in those parts which empty into those two seas. Some Indians assure us that this river is so beautiful that more than 300 leagues from its mouth it is larger than that which flows by Quebec, as they make it more than a league wide. They say, moreover, that all this vast extent of country is nothing but prairies, without trees or woods, which obliges the inhabitants of those parts to use turf and sun-dried dung for fuel, till you come about 20 leagues from the sea. Here the forests begin to appear again. Some warriors of this country, Mascoutens, who say that they have descended that far, assure us that they saw men like the French, who were splitting trees with long knives, some of whom had their house on the water. Thus they explained their meaning, speaking of sawed planks and ships. They say besides that all along this great river are various towns of different nations, languages, and customs, who all make war on each other. Some are situated on the riverside, but most of them inland, continuing thus up to the nation of the Naduesi, who are scattered over more than 100 leagues of country. The course of the Mississippi, its great features, the nature of the country, were all known to the Western missionaries and the traders, who alone with them carried on the discovery of the West. Among the latter was Joliet, who in his rambles also penetrated near the Mississippi. As the war seemed an obstacle to so hazardous an undertaking, the missionaries, it would appear, urged the French court to set on foot an expedition. Marquette held himself in readiness to leave Mackinac at the first sign of his superior's will, and at last, on the 4th of June, 1672, the French minister wrote to Talon, then intendant of Canada, "As after the increase of the colony, there is nothing more important for the colony than the discovery of a passage to the South Sea. His Majesty wishes you to give it your attention." Talon was then about to return to France, but recommended Joliet to the new governor Frontenac, who had just arrived. The latter approved the choice, and Joliet received his proper instructions from the new intendant. "The Chevalier de Grande Fontaine," writes Frontenac on the 2nd of November, "has deemed expedient for the service to send the Sieur Joliet to discover the South Sea by the Mascoutens country and the great river Mississippi, which is believed to empty in the California Sea. He is a man of experience in this kind of discovery, and has already been near the great river, of which he promises to see the mouth." Of the missionaries, 2 seemed entitled to the honor of exploring the great river: Allouez, the first to reach its waters, and Marquette, named for some years missionary to the Illinois. The latter was chosen, and since his departure from Chegoimigon, he had constantly offered up his devotions to the Blessed Virgin Immaculate, to obtain the grace of reaching the Mississippi. What was his joy when on the very festival dearest to his heart, that of the Immaculate Conception, Joliet arrived bearing the letters of his superiors, which bid him embark at last, in his company, to carry out the design so long and so fondly projected. The long-expected discovery of the Mississippi was now at hand, to be accomplished by Joliet of Quebec, of whom there is scarce a record, but this one excursion that gives him immortality, and by Marquette, who, after years of pious assiduity to the poor wrecks of Hurons whom he planted near abundant fisheries on the cold extremity of Michigan, entered with equal humility upon a career which exposed his life to perpetual danger, and by its results affected the destiny of nations.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you'll join me next time.